I gave people all the stuff they really needed. Social security checks, utility bills, TV guide.
I want a TV guidance counselor. TV guidance counselor. Staying up to watch all night, and everything's gonna be alright with my TV guidance counselor.
Hey everybody, welcome to TV Guidance Counselor. I am Ken Reed, as always, your TV Guidance Counselor. And this week, this is a guy I've wanted to talk to for a long time. I first became aware of him in the early 90s when he made a movie called There's Nothing Out There when he was 20. And he's written a great book about that recently. I think it's called like Making Nothing by 20. I put a link to where you can buy it in the show links here in the show description. But anyway, this guy, I tracked on this movie when I was growing up, loved it, listened to his commentaries, loved it, fascinating guy. His name is Rolfe Kanefsky, and he also has this amazing career trajectory that we speak about here, where you start there, and currently you're making movies for Hallmark and Lifetime, and there's a bunch of fascinating little tidbits about those that I never would have thought of in a million years, and it's a world that I could hear about forever. And Rolfe's a really nice and interesting and smart guy. So this was really good chat. So if you want to check out his stuff, go to rolfekanefsky.com, ROLFEKANEFSKY. I also put links. And if you can't find the links, just email me at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or ken@icanread.com. Go on the Patreon, just search TV Guidance Counselor Patreon, or at Kenneth W. Reed, at TV Guidance on all the social medias. And I'll get it to you, because read his book, watch his flicks, you'll enjoy them. And I'm still trying to hunt down a lost film he talks about in this episode. So if anyone has a copy of that, let me know. But anyway, please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Rolfe Kanefsky.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Rolfe Kanefsky, how are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm a big fan of your work. I obviously first encountered you in I believe it's your first movie, There's Nothing Out There.
First professional film. Which
was, something I remember reading about, and I think Fangoria got covered in the magazines a lot, because it was like a fan of these movies is making a movie.
Although, yes, and I had to work hard to get that coverage, because those were the days where it was very hard to get coverage unless you had a distributor, and you couldn't get a distributor without coverage and press. So it was a catch-22 situation. So actually, I wrote Fangoria a letter, because I tried to get them to come out to the set. They wouldn't come out. I tried to get as much promotion as possible, and then I got that answer back that they needed distribution, and I kept saying, well, that's not really fair. And then finally, their sister publication, Gorezone, at the time, covered us along with They Bite and the one other film. There were three independent movies. So
right.
No, that was it.
They Bite is it Brett Piper? I think he did that in New Hampshire.
Yeah, in Florida.
Yeah, because you're a native New Yorker, right? You grew up just outside of New York City?
Yes. I was born in New York, and at the age of 3 moved to the suburbs and grew up in Westchester County. Okay,
because I think Tony Timponi was probably the editor at Fangoria then, who's also a very New York guy.
Yes, yeah. Over the years, he knows me. I have, and he's been supportive of a lot of my work. Tony's a good guy.
Because then you went to Hampshire College, right up here in Massachusetts.
Yes, I did. Yep, went to Hampshire for 2.5 years. Fought with them about horror films, because they were very much against anything that was genre related and Hollywood related. So they were much more of independent, arty, experimental kind of college. So Ken Burns was their big guy, doing documentaries. So for people that don't know, Hampshire College, a friend of the show and friend Eugene Merman went there. You kind of make up your own major. That's kind of like a thing there, right? You're like, I'm going to major in, I think he literally majored in stand-up comedy. But if you want to major in horror films, they're like, oh no, that's too lowbrow. Yeah. It's done by evaluations and self-evaluation. So it's not about tests or grades. But you have to be very self-motivated, because you can definitely go there and not do anything for years and spend a lot of money. So you need people that really want to do something. And I was I was there fighting to get into the film department, which I couldn't get into for the first 2 semesters because everybody, likes the idea of going to film, but people don't do the work. So there's a lottery and only allows like 18 people in. And finally, I got my own Super 8 camera and just sort of forced my way into the course. And then I was finally allowed in. So
where were you first discovering horror movies? Was it on TV? Like, because I know PIX and like Channel 9 would show a lot of that stuff. Or were you like a video store kid or going to the theater a lot?
Yeah, well, probably television, watching horror movies. They kind of scared me, so I wasn't big into horror films when I was young, although I had that kind of love hatred because I had terrible nightmares. But I said what really got me into it was Abbott and Costello movies. And the first one I remember seeing was I caught the end of Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which was very funny and a little scary. And then Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein took me a few times to get through the first 5 minutes of the movie because the Lon Chaney Jr.'s werewolf transformation scared the hell out of me until Costello says, get your doggy off the phone. And that got me through it. And then so I that's that whole kind of comedy horror I fell in love with at that point. But a lot of them, were very scary. I had terrible nightmares. The one that really did me in, because I saw it in the theaters, because it was PG, and still to this day, it's like PG, was the 1979 Invasion of the Body Snatchers with Donald Sutherland.
It's horrifying.
Yeah. That's horrifying. And I don't know, again, because it's based on the original, I guess, but graphic violence,
The
nudity,
scream and that
language,
point
I mean,
and
everything about that movie is...
Yeah.
Oh, it's terrifying. Yeah, the only reason we saw it was the show times were right for something, and it was PG, so they let us in. But that gave me nightmares for weeks.
I ran into him once at a Vaughn's in Los Angeles, into Donald Sutherland. And,
okay.
I've told this story in the show before, but I was doing a show at the UCB Theater in Franklin, and I had burned my hand earlier in the day trying to make tea in a microwave at the Airbnb. So I was literally like trying to buy like a burn ointment so I could get through this show I had to do. And I'm in the aisle and Donald Sutherland's like perusing the ointments next to me. And I never say anything to people and I was like just kind of taken aback and I was like, Donald Sutherland. And he grabs my burned hand, shakes it, and he's like, very nice to meet you. And I'm like, but I played it cool. Yeah. But that actually is relevant because you've worked with a ton of, big name people who were in a lot of stuff that, we watched when we were growing up and your stuff later. Was there anyone that you were like super intimidated to work with?
Probably the most was Brad Dourif.
Yeah.
Because I was a pretty big fan of Brad Dourif. Exorcist 3 being fantastic. I mean, obviously Cuckoo's Nest and Chucky and everything else, but there's some great performances there. So that one was, and the first time I worked with some name actors, that was a little intimidating because I was pretty young. It was my second film that I was sort of co-directing. They had shot a lot of it in Russia, and I did the New York unit. And it was a family movie, completely different from There's Nothing Out There, called My Family Treasure. And it had Dee Wallace and Theodore Bikel. And Theodore Bikel, I did not know that well, although, he'd been around forever. I know he'd done Fiddler on the Roof, but his first movie was The African Queen. And he has quite a resume too, and he was very nice. But Dee Wallace was the one because I knew her, and obviously a huge fan of E.T. So, she'd worked with Spielberg. She was in 10 with Blake Edwards, Of course, Joe Dante on The Howling. So I'm like, it was the people she had worked with as a director. Now I'm directing her, so that was, but she was the nicest person in the world. And I've written a few later in the career. I wrote some scripts that she was in, so it was cool. That's the only time I directed her, though.
How did that work? So your second film, it was like a Russian-American co-production. Was it an existing Russian film they re-edited for America, or?
No, it was a film that they had started but never finished.
Okay. And
it was before everything changed in Russia, so the film was sort of outdated all of a sudden. So they had shot like 18 weeks in Russia, and they never shot the American stuff. And then they ran into trouble, so they were looking for a more American feel. They had a rough cut with storyboards, and then I was brought in, and they saw what it was. Is they went to see There's Nothing Out There when it was playing in the A Street Theater, even though horror comedy and nothing like family movie, but they liked the American feel of it, and I got the job. They were an independent couple, a husband and wife that produced the movie. They had Biddy Schramm in the film, who I guess most people know from League of Their Own. Tom Hanks yelling at her for no crying in baseball, and then of course the first couple seasons of Monk. I did not work with her though, but when we decided to turn that into flashback, and then Dee Wallace played the older version of Biddy Schramm, and Theodore Hill was the grandfather, so I worked with that unit. And then I figured out, I wrote my half hour or so of footage and the ins and outs and how to recut the film around the existing footage and where to find transition shots. So I did my best. It was like 5 days of shooting with the two kids, and of course the little boy in that film was Alex Vincent.
Yes,
who had done who I also knew from Child's Play, of course, 1 and 2, and that was like the last film he did for a while until he came back with the new series. And he was very, very nice. And then the little girl playing Melissa was an actress named Melissa, and she wasn't really an actress. She was I think the daughter of the maid of the people who were producing the film. And I met her, and she was so perfect. And I said, like, she can just be herself. She'd be great. It was pretty funny because at first the two kids got along really well, and then he realized that she was sort of stealing the scenes.
Right.
So they got into this sort of like competition thing, and they did not like each other for a while. And there were some very funny stories between the two of them. But it was a cute and being able to work with, that was my first film shot on 35 millimeter with name actors as a SAG film. So it was exciting, even though it was just a piece of the film. And that was my 2 films I did in New York. And then I made the move to California and continued my career from there.
Yeah, because it was New York at that time. You were at the tail end of sort of that independent New York thing with like Bill Lustig and Frank Heneletter, and that they had kind of just that sort of Larry Cohen, that sort of independent New York film thing that started in the 70s had kind of died by about 1990.
Yeah, I was right at the tail end of the horror genre. The whole I said it when we shot There's Nothing Out There in 1989. It was, the genre was still huge with all those horror magazines, and then everything collapsed like the next summer when Nightbreed bombed and Tremors didn't do well in the theaters, and no one knew what the genre was doing, and it was really pretty slow until Scream in '96, and our film spent like 3 years trying to find distribution and a decent release before it finally came out, and it was the humor that saved the film. But people had a hard time understanding the blend of comedy and horror in the movie and what I was doing, because there had been plenty of horror comedies before that, of course, but no one had done that sort of specific meta version of it, of talking about movies and having a character who knew every horror film and every cliche. And that was sort of my gimmick. And I knew from the reaction we got in film festivals around the world and stuff, once we were getting good reviews, that I said, look, if somebody comes along and makes a film with a big enough name and, a budget, I think it's going to do fantastically well. And then sure enough, in 1996, I was proven right. Yeah.
And then the movie came up a ton after that, because people were like, hey, we've seen this before. And you started getting more attention. But was it, when you moved out to LA, were you getting offered stuff along those lines, or were they kind of just throwing horror stuff at you, or stuff where you were like,
no, I was getting nothing. Basically, unless in California, unless you had a really big hit, anything you do outside of LA doesn't count.
Right.
So I had to start from scratch. I thought with 2 feature films, My Family Treasure and There's Nothing Out There, I'd get some kind of offers. And I did get one job offer that fell apart. They finally made the movie, but I didn't wind up directing it. A very weird movie that no one's seen. It was originally called Blood and Water. And it was a very fascinating script, a very dark comedy with some horror elements. And it was eventually called Starstruck. And no one knows about this movie really, but it was about a casting director who owes a lot of money to sort of a mafia thing, and they'll let him live if he casts people for snuff films.
Okay.
And he realizes how many people are willing to sacrifice their life for that moment of fame. And he starts, recruiting people from suicide hotlines, and it's a dark sense of humor. Yeah, comes back to his office one day and someone's hanging from the ceiling saying, I couldn't wait, But I enjoyed the film, and they got a very good cast together. And actually I helped get the actors, Karen Black was in the film, and Julie Strain, and I think Joe Estevez, Lawrence Tierney.
Oh, wow.
I mean, yeah, there were some really good people, and yeah, it fell apart for me. But it was a good introduction to Hollywood because I had literally just driven out to California, and the day I arrived, I got the phone call. We went to a friend's because I didn't have my phone hooked up, and I got the call offering me this job, and I was on it for like 8 weeks and got fired just before Christmas, and then they wound up doing the film with the lawyer who refused to get the contract signed because he wanted to direct the film.
Of course.
So he was sabotaging every director who came on board to do it himself. And, and that was like the roller coaster of Hollywood, perfect for that. But then after that, it took me a couple of years to just try to get a job. I got a few writing assignments, but to get reestablished as a director, it wasn't until I met that French producer, Lon Saritsky, and the blessing curse, of where my career went from that point on.
Well, you say blessing curse, but I mean, like, it's, everyone I talk to, especially directors and, people who've made huge movies, people would know, are always like, it's a miracle if you have a long-lived career as a director in Hollywood, aside from, 3 or 4 people know, like, to be consistently working as a director, especially now, is really hard. And, if people pull up your IMDb, you've been working pretty steadily. Like, it's over something like almost 70 movies you've made.
Yeah, well, as a writer, yes, I've written over 80 movies. As a director, a fair amount. I mean, 28, which is a good, substantial career. But no, I don't. I mean, the Lon Saritsky, the French producer.
Yep.
I mean, you follow that because yes, he was known for the Emmanuelle movies,
yes,
which were these, soft erotic and foreign films, very well established, and they were not pornographic. None of them were pornographic,
right.
but they were very sexual in nature.
Skinemax,
and he was
they were big on late night. Yeah.
And when I met him, he started doing these in 1996. When I started working for him, he had just finished Emmanuelle in Space with Krista Allen, which a lot of people grew up knowing, and he was starting 2 series based on Milo Manara adult graphic novels called the Click and Butterscotch, which Kevin Eastman was a huge fan of, and they were printed here, and eventually Heavy Metal magazine, which Kevin Eastman from Ninja Turtles, got involved with, and all that stuff.
Massachusetts grew up out near Hampshire College.
But I knew I was aware of the comic books because when I was trying to do a footing here, I was trying to figure out how to reestablish myself, and I discovered some adult comic books. There was a series called Xenophile that a guy named Phil Folia had started, and he had done a lot of mainstream stuff, but he had his own label, and he was doing these, and I called them like adult science fiction fantasy with a good sense of humor to it. And I thought, and there was a series, which again, people have sort of lost in time, on Playboy Channel, that I did have for a period of time. Inside Out. Yeah. Yeah. And that's really an undiscovered thing that people should know about, especially in the genre, because of the amount of genre people that worked on this series. But some people were known, some people weren't known at the time. And I was watching these little shorts, and they were sometimes 5 to 15 to 20 minutes long, and they were like these sci-fi Twilight Zone kind of things. But the people who worked on them were people like Bernard Rose, who did Candyman, and Albert Payne before the election, and Sideways, and all those, and Sam Raimi shot one of them. Tony Randall, who did Hellraiser 2, and I mean, so some very talented people, and you could see it. Yeah. And I thought they were great. I was like, these are a little sexy. Some of them weren't even sexy at all, but they were interesting stories. So I thought Xenophile could be kind of like a late night erotic Twilight Zone series. So that's what I was trying to put together at the time when I met Lon Saritsky at the American Film Market. And I had written a script that never got produced. It got published finally as a screenplay called Hormones the Movie, which was a teen sex comedy, weird science kind of thing. And I used that as a writing sample, and he saw there's nothing out there. And then he said he's doing Click and Butterscotch, and I knew of him. He was impressed that I knew of them. And would I be interested in writing and directing some of these films? At that time, I wasn't doing anything. So it made sense. And everyone sort of warned me, saying, if you start doing that, go down that road, it's going to get, you're going to turn into the next Jim Bernarski or whatever. And, and
No one
I know
wants that.
Jim, but that wasn't my goal to get into it. I said, look, I mean, you can experiment. And it was like, as long as you had, because these films had to have a certain amount of sex and nudity, you could do whatever you wanted. And, doing a James Bond parody, doing an X-Files thing. I mean, I had fun experimenting and, found some talented actors like Robert Donovan and Kira Reed, and made these crazy late night cable, soft erotic movies. So it was fun for a while. The only thing is that with some of the titles, you start to get pigeonholed, and people. That's why you start using pseudonyms, and you don't want to be known, and people have trouble differentiating between real pornography, because sometimes you do have adult actors in these things, and softcore. But depending on the names, it's like a B-level movie if it was Shannon Tweed, but it was an A-list movie if it was Sharon Stone. Right.
But, same exact.
If you look at this, look at the difference between some of the sex scenes in those movies, Basic Instinct and Night Eyes.
Right.
What's the difference?
I mean, any Esther House script, really. It's like,
exactly right. All that kind of stuff. So it's all the talent involved in it and how it's shot versus the storyline. And we weren't doing erotic thrillers. These were all science fiction, fantasy. So, The Click is about a remote control that turns people on, and Butterscotch is about the erotic misadventures of an invisible man. So to me, those were like so outrageous. They were fun, and I had a good time with them.
Well, I always think of Ed Alan Arkish on, and Alan said about Roger Corman, he goes, what we used to say at AIP is, or at New World, you can make whatever movie you want as long as it's the movie Roger wants. So it's kind of the same thing where it's like, you can do whatever you want as long as you give them a couple of things they need to sell it or whatever. And then outside of that, like it's a unique position to have that kind of freedom and in the resources.
Oh, yeah. And Saritsky was very good friends with Roger Corman. So the deal was that Corman had the domestic rights to these films, and Alon had the international, because he made all this money on the international sales with Germany and places. So Roger came down the set a few times, and I had a few dinners with him and Saritsky at his house. So I got to meet him and talk to him, which was great. And I remember one dinner was actually just before a month before the release of Scream. And he asked me, I can't do an impersonation, but he's like, do you think this movie is going to make any money because it's coming out at Christmas time? And I'm like, well, The Exorcist came out at Christmas, so there are exceptions to it at all. But I said, the idea of this film, I did a movie a long time ago that actually you passed on, as when I was trying to sell the film, we took it to Roger Corman, and I was told, well, it's good, but, we do these films seriously. Right. So because of the humor, he didn't like it, which was supposedly the exact same thing when they read the Scream script, because Kevin Williamson was trying to sell it, and they turned that down too because of the humor. Right. Because, even though Little Shop of Horrors and Buckets of Blood, I mean, Corman had done very well with dark comedy films, so he does know how to do it, but they were playing it safe, Anyway, so when Scream came out and made a fortune, but I do remember Roger wondering if the movie was going to do well or not. So,
of course he would. But this is sort of a unique time in television, the sort of early to mid 90s, where you're getting sort of Playboy Channel, who I think had just bought like Charles Band's studio in Glendale or something. Like they were deciding they were going to produce their own stuff. You had Showtime was trying to get more stuff. They had stuff like Red Shoe Diaries, but then they had like Perversions of Science, and like they're all trying to really say, hey, we can do this stuff on subscription television. The sort of market for this that used to be in theaters in the 80s for sort of softcore kind of racy stuff is gone now. So it all moved there, and you had a lot of different people sort of pumping money into those things. Even USA Network, who made a ton of erotic thrillers that had no sex in them, which is still amazing to me. They make Hitchhiker episodes without the things people watch the Hitchhiker for.
Right, yeah.
Or Silk Stockings or any of the other shows they picked up.
Well, at the time there was, the early 90s when Saritsky was doing it, there was like there's Playboy Channel was doing these movies. Was the EI on the East Coast, the Misty Monday films, which I had a meeting with and talked to them about it, and they were very interested. But the thing was, they were like, well, we'll hire you to write, direct, produce, and edit these films and pay you $4,000 total, and then you find your salary within that. So it's like, what? Do I want to make a good movie, or do I want to eat food? Yeah, exactly. And then Charlie Band was doing the Surrender cinema that Dave DeCouteau was in charge of. But out of all those, and Roger Corman had his, all stripper movies and, Strip to Kill and all that stuff. So, but Saritsky was a little more open to it. Like the one that's my favorite is the Rod Steel, my James Bond parody. You only live until you die. Originally called Balls of Thunder, and that was too controversial at the time. and actually, when we almost came out, we got a cease and desist letter from MGM because they're like, "Well, you're obviously making fun of You Only Live Twice," and it's like. And then when they saw the film and saw the material, they dropped it. They were like, "Yeah, we're not worried." But yes, it was that kind of had fun with James Bond and parodying all that stuff. And Alon was willing to be a little more open, so I insisted on doing the title sequence, and we got real horns for the music that Jay Wolfel, a filmmaker friend of mine, and Chris Farrell's done most of my music, did, which was wonderful. So it was really fun. And then this movie was shot in 6 days. And it was shot in film. This is back when we were shooting 16 millimeter. So it was challenging to do that. But at that time, it was a great learning experience. Like the people that worked for Roger Corman in the beginning, all the famous people, James Cameron and, all these great filmmakers. People didn't come out big like me, but I got through it. And I did convince Alon to develop a few other projects. My favorite being the film that has never been released domestically at all, called Tomorrow by Midnight, my lost masterpiece, I guess, that hopefully one day, still trying. I don't know if you know that movie.
No, it was released overseas or just...
It was released overseas under different titles and not full frame, not letterbox, because we shot 35 millimeter, 2:3:5 ratio, 5.1 Dolby Digital surround sound. It's a dark thriller that I did for Saritsky. It was right after he did Dead Man's Curve. He got involved with a few legitimate movies. That was a dark comedy thriller with Matthew Lillard and Michael Vartan.
They were trying to get somebody
Carrie Russell
to kill themselves in college because they thought that you could.
Yeah, the roommate. If your roommate dies, you get a immediate phone call. They did a movie called Dead Man on Campus, which was more of a comedy version of that. Yeah, but they had done that film and they were looking for a follow-up. And I wrote a script called Tomorrow by Midnight that was about 4 kids going to rent a video and wind up taking the store hostage for the night. So it's kind of a Clerks meets Dog Day Afternoon or Breakfast Club with Guns, however you want to describe it.
I need to see. This is like exactly the kind of thing I'm into now. I need to see this. I come up with the idea a few years earlier, and Saritsky thought at this point we were talking about, it was actually just before Blair Witch. So they were talking about doing it all through video camera POVs. And I wrote the original script that way, although I didn't really want to shoot it that way. And then when we raised more money, we decided to shoot it on 35 millimeter properly. And no, the film, it's a dark thriller that I really very proud of. There's more references in this movie because it's USC students who are into film, talking about film in film. And this was shot in 1999. And it had played a few film festivals out here, but because of producers fighting and stuff, it just sort of fell through the cracks and has never been released in America. And it stars Alexis Arquette, Carol Kane, Jorge Garcia before Lost. He has a small part in it. It's a very good cast of people. Really proud of the film. It deserves to be seen. So that's my most personal movie to date that has something to say about violence in movies and violence in real life. So that was the film that I thought could get me into the Sundance and stuff, but it got some festivals and won some awards, but it just didn't quite. What happened was we shot the film, and 3 months after the film was shot, Columbine happened. Yeah, and suddenly, even though the film wasn't glamorizing it, it was actually about the issue in a lot of ways, but everyone got scared of the film. Our sales team said, you made a spinach movie. They said it's a movie that's very important and good for people, but they don't want to watch it because it's spinach. Right. It's good for you, but even though that's not the case, because as I said, I realized anyone like 25 years and younger thought the film was really funny, and anyone like 30 years and older thought it was a very powerful movie. And the film fell between both of those things, that it's a comedy drama and it does have a lot to say, but it never loses its sense of humor and its references. And, me being a film buff, so it's, as much as like, I hit everything, so good man.
Yeah. So it's the ultimate like film lovers, there might be so much film talk, it drive me crazy, but at the same time, there's a reason for that. And I asked the question, like, why do people talk through films and references versus just talking to each other? Right. So at the time, because after Kevin Smith hit with Scream, and everybody was doing that, and Kevin Smith and Kevin Williamson, and it was like everything was meta. So I wanted to address why is everything meta.
Yeah.
So it's meta on top of meta, going to the next level. That was my goal.
Because it's kind of a bookend of there's nothing out there, but one of the things that I talk about on this show is sort of that shared experience. Like, for those of us who grew up pre-millennium when we were watching TV, we knew everything that was on TV, whether we watched it or not. We all have this shared experience. People you totally disagree with or don't know anything about, you can talk about Marsha Brady getting hit in the nose with a football. And in that regard, I love that sort of references, but I do recall seeing sort of the Tarantino film threat sort of wing of stuff in the 90s where to me, it became less about shared experience and more about look at the stuff I know and like testing people. Like, I made a reference. Did you get it? Are you cool? And it was,
oh yeah.
And I imagine that's probably kind of touched on in the film.
Oh, the film is, the opening of the movie that you hear a conversation, if I can remember the whole thing was, who can name all the Friday the 13th films in order? And they said, that's been done. What? Kicking and Screaming. What? Kicking and Screaming, 1995 film about 4 college kids that don't know what to do with their life. They discuss the Friday the 13th films in order. I thought that was Sleep With Me. No, in Sleep With Me, they talk about Top Gun and symbolism. Wasn't that conversation in Swingers? No, in Swingers, they talk about Mean Streets and Reservoir Dogs. Why would I get those confused? Because it's Tarantino was talking about Top Gun and Sleep With Me, and Swingers is discussing Tarantino's movie. It's a common mistake. That's what starts the film. So once you go to that level at the beginning, you're like, okay, you know what you're in for. And then later on in the movie, when they're talking about the references, they're like, oh yeah, this is all one big circle. The problem is, ladies and gentlemen, ideas don't increase in value the more often they're stolen.
Yeah.
So this movie is so much about that, and as I say, it gets a lot out, but it does it in a funny way. It never loses its sense of humor, and it makes fun of. At one point because I had the rights, but they do put on "There's Nothing Out There," and are watching that movie, and they're like, they're talking about Roger Corman. And they're like, is this a Corman film? He goes, it has all the trademarks, but no, sadly, it's just a cheap imitation.
He turned it down. He said it was...
Yeah.
So when you were growing up, aside from being a movie kid, were you like, I get the sense you might have been like a Mad Magazine comics kid as stuff as well? Just basically...
Yeah, I read Mad Magazine. Yep, I love Mad Magazine. I grew up like 70s into the 80s. And I knew early. I fell in love, like I said, with Abbot and Costello when I was like 3 or 4 years old. I started watching. I wanted to be kind of a clown, comedian. I was always writing stories. Even before I could write, I would tell stories to babysitters and they would write it down. I sort of started doing my own original Abbot and Costello stories, moved on to Winnie the Pooh, which I also fell in love with and have no interest in seeing the horror movie that they made.
It's gone.
Yeah, I heard horrible, and it's up for the Razzies, whatever. But I'm like, no. Same thing with the Mickey Mouse now. No, yeah. It's just this new trend of like, what's public domain we can make into a horror film.
Tijuana Bibles, but not even that interesting. Like just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Doesn't mean you should. No. Things like fairy tales and stuff like that, because grim fairy tales very dark, and you do good dark stories of that. The project I wanted to do forever, and I wrote a script of it when I was in high school, was a modern take of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, because at that point no one had done it. It was way before Tim Burton and before the Sleepy Hollow series, but I thought, the Disney still the best version of it, in my opinion. A great way to do it, and you can do it contemporary without putting on a motorcycle, a la the Night Stalker episode that Robert Zemeckis wrote.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, it was, but I grew up on those things. And then I got my video camera when I was 13, and I decided, I wanted to be a filmmaker when I was like 14. So at that point, I started looking into it, and that's when I realized most first-time filmmakers started with horror films because it didn't cost a lot of money. And, so there was Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola with Dementia 13 and Oliver Stone with The Hand and Seizure.
Seizure, that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, Martine Beswick's in that, yeah.
Yeah, Seizure, and Spielberg had done The Night Gallery and Something Evil, which overlooked. Pretty good movie too.
Movie. Those made for TV 70s movies, like
were great. Awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that stuff. So I said, okay. And I started renting at that point every horror film on video, learning the rules and everything and the cliches. And that's what sort of eventually gave birth to There's Nothing Out There, after I saw the infamous Siskel and Ebert episode at the movies where they talked, destroying every slasher film. And as a thing, I said, I wonder how long it'll take to write a low-budget exploitation horror film. And I started writing There's Nothing Out There in high school, but I couldn't do it straight because I started writing the cliche. I'm like, I can't just do the same cliches.
Right.
So that's where I had the character who'd seen the horror films. I said, because I said at that point, why hadn't the movie, a teenager, because they star in these movies, and they're the ones who watch horror films, ever seen a horror film? Why do they do all the stupid things? Because these are the kind of movies they would watch anyway. They would know the rules and the warnings. And at that point, no one had really done that. There had been a few movies where people knew of movies and talked about it, and I loved, Night of the Creeps and
or even Fright Night with Evil Ed. Like there was always kind of an expert character that they would
expert character,
but it wasn't the same kind of
No, and it was great. And the American Wolf of London, even they talk about The Sign of the Wolf and all that stuff. The Lon Chaney movie. So, and those movies I loved. So the idea of comedy horror I thought would be a fun way to do it, because Fright Night was a huge influence when I saw that in the theaters.
Well, because it was sort of that you were the tail end of that, or maybe in the second generation of the people who grew up watching these movies who get to start to make these movies. Like instead of the 50s and 60s, a lot of those guys had worked, even like the Hammer directors, like they were just kind of journeyman guys, a lot of them, and starting with people like Spielberg, who had kind of grown up as huge fans of this stuff and start to, spin it through their aesthetic into something new. It was sort of, from like 75 to 95, I think, if I unscientifically had to put it, and then sort of post 95, it's what we were talking about earlier, where it's kind of just like references with no translation. It's not filtered through you. It's just like, look at I'm not a big Quentin Tarantino fan, and I always would refer to him as the Puff Daddy of film, in that he had good taste and was essentially just sampling things,
Yeah. Well, and he's admitted to most of that too. Sure. But I mean, I liked it, but the thing was that Tarantino fell into a little bit like Hitchcock, where the people who don't understand what the psycho shower scene was like, okay, we got to get a girl naked in the shower. It's like, that wasn't the point of the scene. There was no nudity in that scene. Now it was, and that's why There's Nothing Out There, which most people still don't understand, because when I see reviews of the film, they like, well, they do this shower scene with this girl, this long shower scene, but we don't see any nudity. So why did they even show that? At first they think, well, she won't do nudity, but then we do show her naked later on. Right. But it was like, no, I wanted to do it like a soap commercial, because the whole point of one of these scenes was just to show a girl naked. So I was going to shoot it. And I told her, I said, we're absolutely not going to show you. We're going to pan and cut away just before, and you're going to soap and lather up and shampoo whenever, like you're actually taking a shower. So I thought that was the parody of it. Sometimes, the jokes are more obvious, and sometimes they're subtle. Because a lot of people now, I see all the new reviews on our latest release of the movie, and people really enjoy the film more now, 34 years later, than when I made it. But they do, because now everyone's so aware of the exploitation elements, and, there's a girl in a bikini for half the movie, and there's a fair amount of nudity, both men and female nudity. But they're like, why is there all this nudity, and how, they're exploitative and all this stuff. And it's like, that was part of the joke, and that was what everybody was doing. And even in the movie, it's talking about that. I mean, the scene where it match cuts on the bras being popped open, and you don't actually see the nudity there, but the guy's watching her, and she's like, you're just going to lie there and watch? And he goes, I'm enjoying the view. And she goes, yeah, you and everybody else. Right. Start your own script show. He goes, who's everyone else? It's the audience. Yeah. That's like breaking the fourth wall moment too. The boom mic is the most famous, but it's like, it was all in there as part of it, because I wrote the script in high school. I rewrote it in college, and I took a course at the University of Massachusetts, because when you took Hampshire, you could go to take courses at the 5 colleges. And there was a course called Cinema and the Psyche. And it all talked about, what films are telling you. And there was a whole thing that, that John Carpenter and Stephen King talked about, that horror films, they're all morality plays, and they're telling you something rather they're intending to or not. So I said, well, if people are going to read into things, I might as well put it in myself. So when I wrote the script, all of that was in there as my college, thing, discussing the genres. So there was a whole level, and all the actors knew that, because I went through it all with them. And, the famous one is I took everyone to see Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan.
Jason Takes the
Because
Boat.
it opened just before, Takes the Boat, just before we were shooting the movie. And I said, watch, because we watched it on 42nd Street in New York. I said, watch the audience as much as the film, because I want you to see how they react to the movie. And, the audience didn't like the movie, especially because they shot it in Canada, and they were like, there's no gas, there's no subway station out there,
What the fuck?
But with the exception of when the kid's on the rooftop punching Jason,
knock his block off.
Yeah, that the audience loved, and he gets decapitated. But
the POV of a decapitated head is.
But there were the moments where, and so I said, now because while we're making, think of the audience while we're shooting this movie, because we're aware of what they're aware of, and that's the whole game. That's where it was. That's what I was playing, where the audience would expect one, which is why I thought I can get away with the boom gag.
Sure,
because there were so many low budget movies, especially in the genre, where they make mistakes. You see shadows or things you're not supposed to see. And I'm like, people are so aware of this that if I drop the boom mic into the shot, the audience is going to think it's a mistake, and then the character swings on it. And then and everyone still talks about this to this day. Still, that's the best, So it's fun. It was playing with the audience. Yeah.
Were you going into, speaking of 42nd Street, when you were growing up, were you going into Manhattan a lot? Were you going to those kind of things, or?
I went to Manhattan a lot. Yeah, my father worked in Manhattan. He was a film editor, and he had his own post-production house, which is what helped us with the post on There's Nothing Out There, Falcon Film and Video. And he was on 49th Street, and then he moved to 51st Street. And that was at the time, and this was, late 70s. I mean, the infamous movie that my father did mostly documentaries and very interesting films, but he did dabble in genre films depending on work. Ganjan and Hess is one of his famous ones that he edited, which is Spike Lee's favorite film, and Museum of Modern Art and all that stuff.
Bill Gunn,
he was the editor.
Bill Gunn,
yep. And he was very involved in that film, and then he also edited most of Joel M. Reed's movie, including the infamous Bloodsucking Freaks, which was the only film when he was cutting it he wouldn't allow me in the editing room because he's like, no, you shouldn't watch this. It's so disgusting. And I didn't even discover the film until late high school when I rented it one night and I saw my father's name. And then I saw him in the audience in the opening scene. He's an extra in the movie. And I was like, that's my dad. And that was very funny. So, and I met Joel and Reed, but some of those genre films over the time. So I go down to the city, and then sometimes I go off to 42nd Street where they had all the movies, and it was after the days when it was really dangerous. So if you listen to the documentaries on Joel and Reed and some of that stuff, where it was like all the raincoat crowd, and I never went into the adult theaters, playing the pornos, but I saw some of the Full Moon stuff, and I remember where they had little televisions outside the theater showing coming attractions for films like Class of Nukem High and the Troma stuff, and then I worked for Troma. For one summer, and worked on Troma's War. So I mean, that was the thing. I said, so my background, I was lucky that in the East Coast, I was able to work for Troma. And then when I moved out to California through Saritsky, I worked for Corman sort of, and I did a little bit with even Full Moon. So the three biggies of independent film, I was able to be around there,
Right. And it, as those were going away, there's no equivalent anymore that really exists. Like Full Moon was kind of the last one. And, so your dad was kind of a contemporary of Roberta Findlay and those guys working in that.
Yeah. He didn't know her, but, he, like you said, he did mostly documentaries, right. National Geographic Explorer, and all these, he did a great documentary on the USS Indianapolis and Polar Bear Alert. And some of these were Emmys and stuff like that. But every now and then, though, the genre stuff would come up. He Melvin Van Peebles. He edited a thing called Identity Crisis with Mario that started it. And actually, it was that collaboration between the father and son that he really sort of inspired him to finally do There's Nothing Out There with me, and then have that same kind of, and it did work great, that collaboration, because I've been biting at the bit, trying to chomping at the bit to get to do a movie, and I had been personally kind of competing with Spielberg because he did his first professional thing at 21, and I wanted to tie or beat him. So I was in college, I was doing little horror shorts and things. The opening Just Listen is playing on the monitor in the beginning of the movie, and that was a short I described it like an Alfred Hitchcock Presents horror thing. And the college hated it. The film, it was funny because the film department I went to, they saw it and we played screening in class. And then all the teacher says, he goes, well, that shows you how easy it is to do a horror film. And in the summers, I started doing PA work and I worked on a few independent films. And they saw it and they were very impressed with it. There was one I worked on called Pose for Murder, which was a slasher film that Brian Thomas Jones, who did Rejuvenator and a few films, directed, and he was cool. And there was even one shot he let me yell action. It was locked off camera shot, but that was neat. And there was one shot they were doing up the stairs, and a few people on the crew says, "What does this remind you of?" And it was a shot that was very similar to my short. So they were like, "Hey, where do you think you got that shot from?" But so I was like saying, so I started learning the difference between the academic world and the film and the real world, because I wanted to make a living as a filmmaker. But so I say, well, that's why I sort of eventually dropped out of Hampshire, because I made there's nothing out there, and they didn't even want to give me any credit towards it, which is what led to the book, the Making Nothing at the Age of 20, which just got published at the end of last year, which was also 34 years in the making, because I started that to help my graduation from college.
It's better late than never on that.
Yeah.
But Troma's War is, I'm not the biggest Troma fan, but Troma's War was like did they shoot that in Staten Island or something like that? Am I remembering?
They did it in a national park, most of it. It was like Camp Smith or wherever it was, but it was their biggest budget film. It was like a $1.2 million movie, because they have some pretty big stunts in it. I was on it for about a month and a half. I was on location. Half the crew was quit or got fired because the money was terrible. It was raining. We were like lugging equipment up, muddy hillsides it was terrible. But I did learn a lot working on the thing. And, it was just before I started college. So I left in order to not get sick to start college. But Lloyd was always very cool, and he actually had you hear his voice at the end of this Tomorrow by Midnight. There was a cameo, and you hear him also in Pretty Cool, the teen comedy I directed. But Lloyd's always been very supportive and neat about it. But Troma wanted to buy There's Nothing Out There when we finally made it, but I didn't want to give it to him, because at that point everything that was a Troma film they thought was done by Troma,
right? Even
though they acquired some films. But, until Cannibal the Musical with Trey Parker and Matt Stone, where some of the filmmakers started saying, wait a minute, this is not a Troma movie. You can see there's a difference between the mentality. And then eventually, one of the re-releases, we gave it to Troma, which got a little bit more, exposure, which was cool.
I went to a reading that Kaufman did when he wrote that, like, semi-autobiographical How to Make a Movie book in the 90s. Yeah. It was in Boston. So Brett Piper showed up, and he was pissed because I guess Lloyd owed him money for like a Nymphoid Barbarian and Dinosaur Hell. And I thought it was a bit, but it was kind of amazing because I didn't know Brett, but he's kind of an intense guy. Is what I got. Yeah. And that was pretty amazing. But that movie he made as more of kind of a serious film, and Troma didn't just pick up movies, they would kind of re-edit a little bit, retitled, and some people weren't super psyched about that.
Yeah, back in the day. Well, the most infamous, more Harvey Weinstein, when he did the movies.
Yes.
Let's cut 20 minutes out of every movie, no matter what it is.
Yeah. 20 minutes too much. So there's a lot of that went around. But my father cut some trailers for, I think he worked on Sergeant Kabuki Man, NYPD. Okay. There was some trailers there, and there was some editing jobs and things, because my father was a freelance, he had an office and he'd rent out space and stuff like that. And we spent the summer, or the fall working on There's Nothing Out There for almost a year. It was a good experience, but I just tapped around the edges of all those kind of people. Just enough to get a taste and not need to get like totally.
Yeah, like, you learn like things to avoid and things to things that are smart, things that are not smart. Because I did every job on the Troma film, because everyone does everything,
Sure.
And it was. There's stories. I think I'm interviewed on one of their discs as a PA for like 7 minutes talking about my remembrances of working on that film. But yeah, and then of course Tiffany Sheepis, later on, I wound up, working with a lot, and she started with Troma as well. We were about 10 years apart, so I never met her through Troma, but years later is when we started doing our stuff.
How did you meet her? Just through casting, and she?
No, I met her at the American Film Market. Like a lot of people, the AFM was a great place to network, and she had started her own distribution company called Prescription Films, and they had everyone. She was taking a cue from Troma, and she had a lot of people dressed up as sexy nurses and doctors going around with fake syringes to try to get people down. And I was at that point trying to find money for The Hazing, a script that I had written. And I gave her the script. She read it. She loved it. She wanted to play Marcia. She tried to raise the money for a couple of years, couldn't do it. And then when eventually we did get the money raised, I went back to her and we stayed in contact, and she auditioned many, many times, but finally, luckily got the role. I was pushing for her the whole time, and the producer had to be convinced. And she did a great job. And that was really our first official time, working together. She'd done a little bit part in something else I did, but besides that, yeah.
What was the full moon thing you worked on?
The full moon thing was The Killer Eye.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was a writer. I was one of the 3 writers on that script. Dave DeCouteau was directing that movie and used a pseudonym. But he didn't want to do the film. He really didn't want to do the film. And I forget the name. Neil Marshall was the original writer of it, and DeCouteau hated the script. So what he wanted was to bring me on as the writer and convince Charlie to let me direct the film. And I actually thought it could be kind of fun, a giant killer eyeball trying to have sex with women. It was kind of madness. And I did my pass on the script, which Dave loved, but Charlie refused to let me direct. He wanted Dave to head up this division. So Dave eventually hired Matthew Jason Waltz to rewrite me and simplify everything, because he was going to shoot this thing in 4 days, which he did, which is also amazing what he did. The eye itself was really cool. And they made the film. But as I said, if I had done the film, although they never would let me, but I would love to do it as a musical. Yeah. As I said, this thing should be like a cross between like Reanimator and Tremors and Little Shop of Horrors, and that would have been great, Yeah,
because it was. I think he reused art for a thing he did in the 70s for.
Headless Eyes. Yes, it's the same artwork for that. And then, that thing. And then I wrote a script for them right after that I was going to direct that fell apart literally 2 hours before casting began. We had the auditions ready to go, and people were going to come in, and they pulled the plug on it, which they eventually made as an entirely different movie called Piranha Women. Okay. Which just came out recently, that Fred Olen Ray directed. It has nothing to do with my script. My script was like a PG-13 splash kind of coming-of-age story comedy. But that fell apart. So that was my short experience. But I knew I had a lot of friends who'd worked for Full Moon, people that still at Courtney Joyner and all these, Transfers 3 and Lurking Fear and Puppet Master 3 wrote the script. And everyone basically told me, you don't want to work for Full Moon. At this point, it was like they were doing things so cheap and that like stay away from them. So I didn't pursue it strongly. But
you're getting.
I met Charlie a few times.
$2,000 a script, maybe. It's like
Now they do them really, really, really dirty. Yeah. But DeCouteau, I wound up working with a lot at some point when things fell apart, and I had to restart again. And I wrote like a dozen scripts for him.
Because DeCouteau, and that's the sort of the other thing I wanted to mention is there's sort of a third act for so many of those guys, including Fred and DeCouteau, where they're directing and working on all these Lifetime and Christmas movies and cable
which
movies,
is where I am too.
Which
now,
is where you are now,
so,
which is kind of this amazing, bizarre turn of events. Like, if I think about it, it makes sense because they're low budget, quick shot movies that are kind of formulaic and they know you can get it done. But you would never, like, especially DeCouteau, I'm like, this guy's directing some, male erotica, and then, the talking cat the next day in the same location.
Yeah. Well, as DeCouteau said, he's like a journeyman director, and he just, he was fine to work because he basically, his compliment was, my scripts are like director proof. If you just shoot what's on the page, you have a movie. So he liked doing my scripts, and he was worried to hire me at the beginning because he knows I'm very ambitious and, like with Killer Eyes, like, can he write something that can be shot in 3 to 4 days or less, but I being a director and knowing, the problems, I'm like, I can shoot around everything, so, I did the last Lifetime thing I just wrote. They just shot it up in Canada. I have no idea how it turned out, but they wound up shooting 11 days and they took a day out. So they're like, we got to cut another 7 pages out of this and, doing all the chop, chop, chop. And it was frustrating because as a director, I'm like, some of the places where they decided to take pages out, it's like, no, that's not going to save you any time. Right. They said if you have a 5-page dialogue scene between 2 actors versus a 3-page scene with 2 actors, you're not going to say that if the actors know the lines. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It's better to shoot it than and cut it in post. So I understand what's going to take the time and what's not going to take the time. But that's the thing. I only directed one thus far. I did a movie called Pool Boy Nightmare, a Lifetime movie, and the ending has a pretty big chase in the house with Jessica Morris and the psychotic pool boy. And we were shooting all this stuff with Steadicam, and it was small page count, but took some time because it's all action. And the line producer, who's a good guy, said, I'm spending way too much time and we're falling behind schedule. And I'm like, well, I said, the dialogue scenes are going to go quick when you're just sitting around talking, but this takes time to shoot that. And it's like, and it's the end of the movie. He goes, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? He's like, well, the whole thing is that, when they play these movies on TV, you have like the 9-act structure of a film with the commercial breaks. Once you get to act 7, you have them to the end of the movie. So that's why so many of these movies just end with like nothing happening at the end. Someone hits someone over the head and it's over, because you already got your rating. So no one cares about the ending, which is the opposite of a movie where the ending, what's Home Alone without the last 10 minutes of that movie? It's all but 10 minutes of the movie. So, I was like, oh, that makes sense. It's depressing as hell because it's the anti making a good movie. And, so we do have and the thing is that movie is done really well for the Asylum, my experience with Asylum. But, I always think that you make a better movie, it eventually will do better and they'll play it more because people like it actually. So as a filmmaker, you care too much. Even when I was doing the last series of Sawitsky movies, that the insane Emmanuelle Through Time series, which I used pseudonyms on all of them just because I didn't need my name on a bunch of more late night cable movies. But I did a full out musical movie as one of them, and I did another James Bond. I did a vampire parody of Twilight, and these are movies shot down and dirty, but we shot them all, and every movie I tried way too hard. I couldn't just go through the motions. So I'm still really trying to make a movie.
Do you watch, because you said you hadn't seen the Lifetime movie, but or do you watch things you've written that you kind of, send to college, you send a kid away, and then can you watch it?
Oh yeah, I've seen almost all of them. Yeah. I think there's only one that I haven't seen that I worked on because I know they didn't, I'm pretty sure my name's not on it. They took the credit away, and I don't know how much of the script's left, but most of the stuff I've watched, and I don't watch it over and over again. Most of the time it's not good, but I've done a lot of talking animal movies and, plenty of family films, only one Christmas movie so far. It turned out okay. But during COVID, I actually got a lot of gigs for shot in Bulgaria. And there's a Italian producer who's hired me a bunch of times, and we did these romantic comedies that turned out great. Same director on all of them, and he was very talented, and good cast of people, and I'm very happy with those movies. They're funny, they're kind of Hallmark-like movies, but it was kind of cool to work on those. Because again, going back to my Abbot and Costello roots, is like I guess I've been lucky that in a lot of ways I can find as a writer, things that I like in all different genres. So, and I like challenges. So, it's like I've done plenty of horror and comedies and other things, but I like to experiment and do something new. And the thing my next assignment that I just pretty much signed to today is a drama based on a true story about a woman with 2 blind children. And it's got kind of this Erin Brockovich element to it about how she, is addressing the blind and the world accepting and changing the attitude about how people should view the blind as not a handicap, but something, a culture thing and stuff. So it's and it's all based on true stories of stuff and baseball and everything. It's pretty fascinating stuff. It's a little daunting, but I'm like excited to work on something like this. So
that was going to be one of my questions. Do they just assign you a topic, or do you pitch to them? Is it kind of like, or we already have sort of the genre or the kind of movie, and then here?
It's always different. Everything comes from different things. This project is a producer I've worked with a few times have called me up and he knows I'm a good writer, and they had somebody else that didn't work out for them, and he said, let's talk to Rolfe. And so he just called me up out of the blue and said, hey, what are you doing? Are you available? The Lifetime movies, sometimes they have a treatment or they have the concept that they want in a script. Sometimes they have a script and they need it to be rewritten or fixed. And sometimes it's my original idea where they're just looking for ideas, and you throw them, 20 ideas, and they say, we like this one. That's what the last one, this movie called Hidden Away, maybe the title will change, but that's what this one turned into. And it just was, once they agreed to it, it went through very smoothly, but getting to there, they jumped through a lot of hoops. And because I've written now like 10 of these movies, these Lifetime thrillers. And the thrillers, again, I like thrillers. I like Hitchcock, I like thrillers. And the problem with the Lifetime movies is that because of budgetary things and the target audience is that they're like they're dialogue driven. There's too much dialogue. There should be more action. There should be more thrills, but they don't want to make them too scary or too loud because they play in the afternoon in Europe and they don't want to scare the grandmothers and give them a heart attack. So it can't be too dark because it's hard to see in the daytime when the windows are open and the lights coming in. So you have to keep. So there are all these rules and regulations, just like doing the late night cable stuff. Everyone has their own guidelines to do. So you have to kind of follow that. But I was frustrated because I'd written some, and some of them turned out well, but I was like, they're a little flat. And when you go back to the Spielberg and the 70s movies, they made some great TV movies. I'm like, there's no reason why these shouldn't be like that. So Pool Boy actually, it fits right the formula, but there's a lot more visual sensibility. I used a lot of drones and steady cams, and the camera keeps my style. So I tried to add a little Hitchcockian, Brian De Palma-esque feel to it all. But even that, you're dealing with, at the asylum, there's two different producers, the two Davids, and they both have very different opinions of what the movie should be. So we're about to shoot this one scene where the teenage daughter is quickly changing her clothes and she's sort of in her underwear for a second. And, one of them was like, don't shoot it like Cinemax and make it too sexy because this is for, grandmothers. And the other one's like, can she be wearing a thong?
Crank it up.
And it's like, so I'm like, I said, I know I'm shooting this thing, but it was like very specific of like little sexy, but nothing like that world. And that's the thing. Every movie has its own, you basically have to figure out who your target audience is and what you're going for and appeal to that audience. So, yes, the majority of stuff I've done, not the TV stuff, has been R-rated material. And, some of I gravitated to that, but the horror films, and I don't shy away from the sexiness or the nudity. Some people now it's very out. Horror films like almost never have any nudity whatsoever. They're all about. That's why when I did the Blackroom, which I don't know if you saw that one, great cast. That was a script that I wrote to be like almost a late night erotic horror film, and everyone really liked the erotic element of it. Even though at this point I'm like, well, do we really want to keep all that? But they're like, yes, and then I got Natasha Henstridge, and from Species fame, it was like, well, getting her in a sexy role again, not a bad idea. So, and Lynn Shay is all for it, and she was great too, and she was wonderful to work with. But it was a great cast. But when the film came out, it got kind of crucified by how dare they, it's a movie about an incubus and a succubus and
that's the point.
Sexual demons, and that's what they play. And the two adults don't have any kids, so I don't have little kids running around. I'm like, let's do a movie about adults in a marriage that's having problems, and the demon is using sexuality to manipulate them. And I was going back to the Mephisto Waltz in the 70s, and I went through a kind of 70s craze with Bus Party to Hell, which was my Race with the Devil, which I love that movie. And I gave like Satan's Cheerleaders, Race with the Devil, and Bloodsucking Freaks, I think the nods at the end credits. And then there was Art of the Dead, which was my night gallery homage with the paintings, very much so, and using lust and the seven deadly sins. And I thought that one turned out really well too. The movies are earn their R ratings.
Side note: a few years back, I can't remember the name, Creature Features, which used to be in Burbank on,
Yes.
They did the Night Gallery exhibit. Did you go?
I went to that.
Yeah, as did I.
Yeah, you did. Okay. Yeah, no, I was very excited because we were in production. We were in pre-production on a Night Gallery. So I actually bought a painting, one of the redo paintings of The Cemetery, the Ronnie McDowell episode, which I love. And there's a deleted scene, unfortunately, but we did put that painting like in the corner on the floor that you just as a reference in there in one scene with Tara Reid. Anyway, yeah, no, I love Night Gallery, and I thought this was a fun way to kind of play with the formula. And we had a great artist named Clint Carney who did the original paintings for the movie. I don't know if you've seen Art of the Dead.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was really cool. And that's the last horror film I've made thus far. You know, I've written plenty of scripts that I love to do, including a brand new sequel to There's Nothing Out There that I just did the end of last year that if we can raise the money, you know, would bring back Craig Peck and some of the actors as well who are willing to do it. And that would be kind of fun.
It's amazing how you're kind of very chameleon-like and how you're adapting to these things. Sometimes it's a little bit out of phase, like There's Nothing Out There. It was a little bit too ahead. You know, the Blackroom's a little bit, you know, it's probably too ahead actually till stuff comes back around again.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's always fascinating how you do have your finger on a pulse of something. And the other thing about the Lifetime movies is how hard is it to write to that structure with the commercial breaks? Because I know people who worked on the Sci-Fi Channel, and they literally, it was like a Mad Lib they'd give them to write the script.
It's a formula. Once you know the formula, it's not that tricky because you know where the beats are. The hardest thing in the beginning was the difference between a theatrical movie and a TV movie is the commercial that they both want something to start the movie. So you have the inciting incident. That's, you know, the first 3 minutes hook. Then in a movie at the 15 minutes in, you should have the next thing happen. But in a Lifetime movie, it's the 20-minute mark because that's where the commercial break goes into. So I was like having to milk dialogue to get to that moment because everything I was used to writing at 15 minutes, the next thing would happen, not 20 minutes. It's a little too long. That's why Lifetime's always a little off. And then you also hit that at the hour mark, 60-page mark or so, or 50-page mark. You need to recap the movie because sometimes in Europe people tune in for the second hour of the film.
Right.
So if they came in halfway through the movie, they want to get up to speed. So you need to put in exposition that if you're watching the movie shouldn't be there because it's redundant.
Right.
So I hate that as a writer, but they say, no, you got to sort of retell the story a little bit. Sometimes they're not as strict on all that stuff. So it's, you know, and the first one I did, the one with Annalyn McCord, who was fantastic. I didn't direct the movie, but I was there for some of the shoot and became good friends with her at the time. It didn't follow the formula as well. I'm surprised they made it because it had some surprises in the movie, which is what everyone talks about in that film. That's a little crazy, but that was fun, you know, something that doesn't quite, and you would think, you know, and it was very successful. It did really, really well for the company and for them, but they don't do it again. They're like, it's an anomaly versus like, why don't we do more unusual things, you know, versus playing it safe? You know, why do they have to do the exact same story over and over again? So I'm always looking for some way to push the boundaries a little bit, even though, you know, you can't get away with anything visually too extreme, but subtly I mean, I don't know if you saw Pool Boy, but
I have not, no.
At the end of the movie, the Pool Boy, once he goes into his mental problems, you get the idea that he probably killed his father and he was having an improper relationship with his mother. And there was a very Norman Bates-esque thing going on there that's a little disturbing once you think about it. You know, so I said that you can talk about things that might be, and we didn't get censored on that. So that I was allowed to let go, you know. So every now and then you can kind of push the limits. Usually family films are worse because with kids and this is what's frustrating because they're so strict about everything. And yet they say, you know, they want it to be like E.T. and they want to be like the Goonies.
Have you seen
And I'm
those
like,
movies?
exactly. I'm like, you watch those movies like, Corey Feldman, do not, make sure the cocaine and the heroin are in the different drawers and the
My
sex
mother's most favorite
torture
part.
devices are in the, what? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the penis on his, my mother's favorite. Yeah, exactly. That, yeah. No, the joke, and of course, E.T., there was nothing like that penis breath, I mean, there was, because they did, which got the chuckles, but, you do something like that and everyone's like, it's the same thing where they're doing horror films. When I did The Hazing, I remember the producer like, I want this to be as scary as The Exorcist. I want it to be like The Exorcist. I said, okay, so we want to put a scene with a 10-year-old girl masturbating with a crucifix. Like, no, we're not going to do that. I'm like, of course you're not going to do that. Yeah. I was like, I say, the stuff that the stuff that pushes the limits that make people like you never forget the film. That's the stuff you don't want to do. And in horror films, it's always been, at least once I was growing up with Reanimator and all the Evil Deads, it's like there was always that one scene that went so far that everyone would talk about.
Right, you're never going to believe
comedies too. Yeah, something about Mary with the hair gel and so I found that if you do something in a movie and that's the scene that everyone is worried about, you never let it go. You're like, that's the scene that people are going to talk about. And in The Hazing, the tongue scene,
yes,
the infamous tongue scene, which when I wrote the script, people were scared of it. They were like, it's a porno. I'm like, no, we're not going to shoot that way. The producer, again, was like, we're never going to get an R rating on this. I said, yeah, I think we will. I know how I'm going to shoot this. That it's a little dangerous, but it's right on the cusp because there's humor mixed with the gore, mixed with the sexuality that, it's so over the top. I remember the one big fight we had. I did a movie called Jekyll and Hyde. It's a female take on Jekyll and Hyde, sort of a sexy. I saw it as like looking for Mr. Goodbar in a lot of ways, which people don't know about. But yeah, someone finding themselves, Sure. It's a variation of Jekyll and Hyde without the monster, but it's the inner monster. And that film, well, it starred Gabrielle Hall, who I'd worked with on a lot of the Saritsky stuff. She was known for late night erotica. So I said, okay, for her audience, you want to deliver that. But neither of us wanted to make a late night cable movie. So it's not the 3-minute sex scenes and all that stuff. There's enough sexuality, but it's a cross between horror and erotica. And people in America didn't really know what to make of it because they're like, it's too sexy for the horror crowd and it's too scary for the erotic crowd. So it sort of falls. And then when they say, well, maybe it's something a little different and interesting, and that's what it is. When we showed it at the Brussels Film Festival, they loved the film and they were surprised it was an American film because the way the nudity was handled and it was saying something more than just doing the exploitative elements. So that's an example of a movie that, I was trying to play with the sexual. But again, in America, whenever you're playing with sexuality, people get very scared.
Yes.
The old rule. If you kiss a breast, it's X. If you cut it off, it's R.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, when I lived in the UK for a long time and when they would edit movies on TV, they would edit the violence out and not the sex and nudity. And I remember watching Terminator, I think, and there was huge chunks cut out and, the sex scene was in there. And of course that makes sense. Like, but as an American, I was like, I don't understand. Like, what's happened? Like, it was such a weird, mind-blowing experience that was how they do it.
Oh yeah. Well, when I think Chiller showed the Hazing at one point, and I saw it, and they cut out the nudity before the scene with the tongue, but the entire scene with the tongue was left intact, and it's like that scene is so much more outrageous than a bare breast.
Right.
But that's okay to show everyone, but that's so weird. So that was the thing when working for Saritsky a lot, and of course the French mentality and everything like that. Yeah. And it's like, what's wrong with the naked body? And I was like, there's nothing wrong with the naked body. And it's no big deal unless you make it a big deal. So when we were shooting these movies, as long as everyone was comfortable about it and nobody was being forced or tricked into doing anything. And when I did these things, we were very much on the up and up. And I can even say we almost, I did something that no one was doing at the time, was because I had never done any of these late night cable things. I saw some of it and Saritsky gave me some pointers, but he, was left alone. But the rules were back then, this was in the 90s, you had to have 3-minute love scenes every half hour. So you had to have 27 minutes of your 90-minute movie had to have sexual situations. And it was all simulated, and guys wore socks and girls wore patches most of the time. That was at the days, so, but the thing was for these scenes, I'm like, well, you have, a 3-minute scene, and most of the time you just had the actors like go in there and you shot the camera and you shot what you shot.
You're not blocking it out.
But I was like, well, that seems weird and uncomfortable. So, I'd watch Basic Instinct, and the behind the scenes was they said everything was storyboarded and everything was like a dance. So I said, well, let's choreograph everything. So I had an apartment, so I had the actors come to my apartment, and we would choreograph and block the love scenes. And no one took off their clothes. I mean, everyone was dressed in the you see some of that in the behind the scenes stuff. But I remember they got some calls from managers who got freaked out saying, what, he's rehearsing sex scenes in his apartment?
Yeah.
How, that's like, and then the actresses were the ones who said, no, it's great. It's there's no problem. Nothing's improper here. So, that was, and it was funny. And like, even like there were adult actors who went on to be adult or bigger actors, like Stephanie Swift, who's done plenty of porn at days. And she came in and she was, rehearsing the orgasm scene because it was, the clicker gives women orgasms and stuff. And when we did those things, that was the day with, of course, the reference was When Harry Met Sally,
right.
Or, Jane Fonda and Barbarella in The Machine, so it's like, here's how you do it, it was like, and of course the joke was that, there was these were very low budget movies and we had actors all over the place, many of them not great actresses, but they could all do really good fake orgasms.
Do what you know.
They knew how to do that. They all could do that in spades. Yeah. So, no, but it was, like I said, this was 96, 97, and then went up to, almost 2000 or a little less, a little over. Couldn't do any of that now. I mean, intimacy coordinators, which I've yet to work with because I've never done a film yet with require that nowadays. I don't know. There's advantages and good things about that and bad things about it, from what I hear, depending on the situation and the actors involved.
I've seen the contracts. I have friends who have worked with it, and it's like it's not like stereo instructions, but it's like here's what will happen in this, and you like initial here, and it's like a mortgage or something, it's like which I
again, for the safety of the actors and certain things, and but it's at the same time you need to feel comfortable in the scene, and there has to be a little bit of chemistry there, and if it's all robotic, again, that's why I rehearsed it, so people felt comfortable where you're going to put the hands and everyone knows kind of what it's going to be, and as long as you follow the basic thing there, it should be fine. And it was, and most of the time that's what we did with it all. And I would always add humor because, comedy, and these were supposed to be funny anyway, but I know many of those love scenes I did, as I said, I probably wasn't the best erotic director because my sensibility was, there was one, I remember there's one scene we were doing in the Emmanuelle in Wonderland, or Into the Adventures into the Woods. It was released as the musical. And it's a sort of singing, dancing sex scene with nudity, and they're all performing while they're doing the stuff. And the positions were, and some of these were adult actors, and they're like, there's absolutely no way to actually have sex in this position. Like, doesn't matter. It's like, there's no way we could actually, it's like, no, they're back to back. And it's like, it's a joke. It's I don't care, like it's fine,
Do we need to have a very basic conversation with you about anatomy?
Right.
Aside from sort of the Lost film, is there anything else you've worked on that you feel like should have gotten more attention or you'd want people to check out? I mean, everything, but
most of my movies. I'm sort of known as like, people are always like surprised how enjoyable my films are because they have so low expectations of them. They expect going into them to be crap is what it seems like. So, which is good in a way. You're the underdog, so in a way, it should be on a low budget because if you're comparing it to Hollywood $200 million films, you're like, yes, this is a low, but yes, we can't compete with that, and we're not trying to
over deliver.
Right? We take the low budget exploitation. We use that in its advantage. So, I'm happy that now 34 years later, there's nothing out there because of Mubi. Mubi, the streaming site in Europe, started playing the film, and that opened up the whole world internationally for the movie, and it's playing on Amazon Prime and all these places now domestically, Tubi. So people are finally seeing the movie, which is great, but it took a long, long time for there's nothing out there to find it. So, it had a cult little following, but it was always like, and I said, so over the years, the people that heard of the movie who became directors, some of them, I've heard Tarantino's a fan of the movie. I don't know for sure, but I know Joe Lynch and Jeffrey Reddick, who did commentary on one of the tracks, and Kevin Smith knew of the film when I met him because he had been working in video store at the time. So anyone who was working at the time when the movie came out in like '92 became fans of the movie. But over the years, I mean, the Saritsky, I mean, a lot of people are like, if they know there's nothing out, when I met Eli Roth, he knew if there's nothing out there because he saw it. He was going to NYU at the time. And he's like, did you do anything since? And it's like, yeah. I have 30 years career, but you don't know it, So definitely Tomorrow by Midnight. I think that film, I wish that get rediscovered. I'm very proud of One in the Gun, which is a film noir-esque, a neo-noir thriller that I did 15 years ago or something like that with Robert Davi and Stephen Bauer, James Russo. It's a good cast. Stephen Mann is the lead actor, Catherine Randolph, but it's a fun sort of neo-noir thriller, a little bit of a David Lynch mindfuck movie too. That turned out really well. Strange film, but good. And I think Art of the Dead is underrated. I think that film, could get more play because they threw it away. I'm hoping that a Blu-ray on that can come out one day with the bonus features and stuff that were left off the movie. And then there's tons of movies. I mean, some of the TV stuff, like I said, I think Pool Boy turned out well. I think Watch Your Back or / Killer Photo is the Alan McCord one, is a fun thriller for Lifetime. The romantic comedies that some of them are streaming on Shout Factory now or whatever, for better or worse, is kind of an homage to the Money Pit, Tom Hanks screwball comedies. And I did a body swap movie, Freaky Friday-esque, called I'm With Me. That's a really good cast and a fun movie shot overseas. Those two I hope people get to see more of. Then some of the new stuff. I'm hoping I have a lot of scripts that I've been trying to get made. I mean, it's always the case where the ones that you really care the most about are the ones you can't get financed. But I have some really good ones that I think would fit into the world of There's Nothing Out There, and I guess There's Nothing Out There, The Hazing, Nightmare Man. We didn't even mention Nightmare Man. Right. Those three are sort of my trilogy of Nightmare may be the most well known because of After Dark and that whole thing. And I wrote a sequel to that called Nightmare Demon that would pick up today with Tiffany, and she loved the script if we get the money going on that one. So I have a new Still Nothing Out There, a new Nightmare Demon movie. Maybe I'll write a Hazing sequel, but who knows? That one I'm still trying to get re-released. We're having trouble with that because of the SD format and the up-resing, because going back to the negative and stuff. But we're working on it, so maybe this Halloween that'll come out, because The Hazing, I think, is a really fun Night of the Demons type of movie. Kevin Tenney is a big fan of that film too, and we actually did an interview with him talking about it for the release when it comes out. There's a lot of fun stuff out there, and I'm not that old, so I'm not ready to retire.
There's plenty more to come. Yeah, I'm looking forward to all that stuff. And, even me as a fan, I have a list of things I need to go back and watch myself.
Yeah, you hunt some of these films down. There's, the lost movies that just need more attention out there, and then hopefully get the funding for some other things nowadays. Hopefully, but there's still jobs coming in, and I still keep writing. And as I said, I have plenty of spec scripts ready to go that I'd love to do. And at least, all the actors and people I've worked with, it's been good relationships with. I've never really had any of the name actors I've worked with had any problems. They've all been very professional, and we get along well. And, I hope I can work with them again, a lot of them. So, which
is saying a lot, not the people that you work with generally from stories that I hear. That's an unusual scenario. So
yeah. Well, if you look at the commentary tracks, we got Natasha Henstridge and All You Do on the commentary of that one, and it's rare. They don't get paid for these things. So, but they enjoyed working on the films, and Tara Reid was really nice to work with. I'm just trying to think of the different names are there, but. The professionals are, like I said, sometimes there's bad reputations or things, when I did Corpses, that's a messed up movie, but it's kind of fun if you go in the right attitude. It's a total comedy zombie movie. It's not supposed to be scary, but Jeff Fahey was wonderful to work on that film. And he was a trooper, and I'd heard stories about him, but when I worked with him, total pro, and had a good time, doing the movie. So yeah, it's fun. I never like had a list of like actors I'm dying to work with because I don't know the personalities there, but I'm always open to it all. There's there's a few. Jeffrey Combs I'd love to work with, and Bruce Campbell. It might be, and of course, a few actors you're in. Yeah, I guess the most the last thing the most in awe I ever was I was like a senior in high school, and my father was invited to this tribute event at the mayor's house in his backyard. They were giving a special award to I think Scorsese, and and I was like 18 years old, and I'm there, and I'm walking around the garden, and almost everyone in the room, everyone outside were like, it was Spielberg,
of course,
and Griffin Dunn and Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel, and I was like, I kind of wish I talked to Spielberg. I couldn't. I stood and listened to the conversation. He had just gotten back from Europe shooting Empire of the Sun, and yeah, it was like, okay.
That's a lot, though. It
was a lot. For a kid, I was like, oh my God, everywhere. I was like, just like, I love you. Yeah.
That's very cool, though. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, yeah.
That's Rolfe. Go to his site. You will not be disappointed. I hope he gets that stuff made that he's been writing. I can't wait to see it. Sounds very fun. And again, I want to see that lost film in the video store. That's kind of a perfect Ken Reed movie, it sounds like. So hopefully I'll get a handle on that soon. Speaking of getting a handle on things, this is not a transition. It doesn't even make any sense. I'll be handling a new episode. Anyway, I'll be here next week with a brand new episode. So I hope you will too for that brand new episode of TV Guidance Counselor.
Thought it could be kind of fun, a giant killer eyeball trying to have sex with women.